welcome to the Community ROI podcast. Here, senior community experts, founders, and C-level managers tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how a community impacts business growth. By listening to these conversations, you'll get actionable steps on how to connect community goals with business goals to skyrocket business growth while still bringing extreme value to community members. My name is Yurii. I help people and brands shine through communities and personal connections. And my guest is Nicole Saunders, who spent over 15 years, can you imagine that? Over 15 years helping B2B tech companies build stronger connections with their customers through community, customer advocacy, and marketing, from leading community and Zendesk to founding CXN Consulting. Nicole always brings a thoughtful, people-first approach to every conversation about customer connection. So, welcome, Nicole.
Thanks so much for having me, Yurii. I'm happy to be here.
Super happy to talk to you. It's been forever since our last conversation. Still, it feels just yesterday because of LinkedIn is always there. So yeah, let's start with the first question. What's your definition of a community for business?
So I think of community as anything that's focused on connecting the customers to one another. So that could be a discussion forum. It could be like a Slack or a Discord. It could be in-person events, user groups, meetups, that kind of thing. But really, it's anything that has the objective of getting customers talking to one another and forming a group identity. So I think some of the key characteristics are it has to be a place where people come repeatedly. They may run into the same people on a regular basis, and they're there to connect and help each other. Now, that's not to say that members of a business can't be part of the community. Certainly, in a community, oftentimes customers want to hear from product managers and other people. But the point has to be that the focus is on the customers talking to each other. I've definitely heard people refer to things like a newsletter or an event where it's mostly the company presenting as getting the community together. And that's really more getting an audience of people who could form a community together. If it's not about them connecting with each other, it's not quite community yet. So that's really sort of the loose definition of it. I think a lot of organizations think of just their discussion forums or just their user groups as community. And I think it's actually all of that stuff. It moves sort of throughout the organization. Community can consist of a lot of different things that are focused on connecting those customers to each other.
Once I had a client who I had 10,000 people in my community. I'm like, oh, cool, great, show me it. Oh, here's my newsletter. I'm like, okay. So it's not really a community, but yeah.
Yep. So it's where we always talk about that difference of audience versus community. And I think an audience always has the potential to become a community.
Yeah.
But if it's just you talking to them, if it's a one-to-many situation, it's not community yet.
And what's in it for business? Why do business need customers talking to each other? Because sometimes you can feel like, oh my God, no, they will tell all the secrets. They will share all the bad stories to each other and we will lost all the clients. So what's in it for business?
Well, I hear those concerns all the time, and I always want to push back and say those are actually good things because people bond through challenge, right? Think about some of the coworkers that you've been closest to. It's probably people that you worked on a really hard project with or survived a really bad manager with or something like that. People tend to form those bonds through adversity. So having people sharing the challenges that they're having with your product or service with one another is not necessarily a bad thing. The reality is it's not a secret, right? Whatever gaps there are in your software or your service or whatever it is, people know about it. They're talking about it on Reddit, on whatever we're calling Twitter now, all of those other places on the internet. It's out there. They're talking about it. So one, don't be afraid of that because the reality is if people are talking about it, what it means is that they're also working towards solutions together. And that is the point, right? It's that they are going to compare notes and figure out how they're dealing with this challenge. And they're going to come up with a workaround or somebody's going to build an app that layers on top of your software that solves for that problem, or it's going to bubble up to your product team that they might not even have been aware of yet, and they're going to be able to fix that. But that only happens if you're allowing those conversations to happen and you're listening. So that's to speak to that piece. But there's other benefits of getting your customers to talk to each other as well. So first, don't be afraid of the complaints and the drawbacks and the challenges, it's actually a good thing for your organization. Um, there's also obviously things, I think the sort of the low-hanging fruit for a lot of communities is peer-to-peer support. If somebody's asking, hey, where do I find the setting to do XYZ? And another user can tell them instead of having them have to call into your support organization and take time from the employees that you're paying to do the technical work. So obviously that's helpful. User-generated content, every answer that somebody posts on a community, it doesn't just answer that one person's question. It answers that question for everyone that views it in the future. So that is super useful, both from a support deflection standpoint and
Hmm.
also an SEO standpoint. It's more and more content and information about your product or service that is getting published on the web. And then there's that idea of stickiness. And this was a really hot topic that we talked about a lot about 10 years ago in the community industry. And these days, in a slightly tighter economy, I think people are more focused on that cost savings. But retention is still a really important piece of this, right? People are more likely to stick around if they feel like they've got a community of other users that they can tap into when they have a problem. If I'm
Yeah.
having an issue with software and my only option is to email the company and hope that they get back to me within a few days, that's frustrating. But if I can email the company and then also go on the community and chat with some other users and maybe get my answer faster, I'm going to feel much more like when I do run into problems, I've got a bunch of different people that I can tap into for help, not just one. I'm also more likely to stick around. If I make friends with other customers and I'm having problems with the software, I'm more likely to try to work through those problems because I
Yeah.
want to keep being a customer of this company. I have that brand affinity now. Um, and then, of course, there's the brand advocacy standpoint where you can find those people that are super passionate about your stuff. And pro tip, those are often the people that complain the loudest. The people that raise those concerns do that because they care and they want your software to work and they like you and they want you to be better. So if you can turn that around and get those people to be your advocates, that's key. But those folks are going to be the ones that are going to, answer most of the questions in your community, generate most of the content, go out and create their own YouTube channel talking about you and helping to promote your brand. People that you can engage to come speak at events and give you quotes for your marketing and be a sales reference and all of those things. So, what you're hearing me say is that there's a lot of reasons that businesses should have and invest and engage in their communities. It touches every part of the business, and there's benefits all over the place.
I feel like the community is a business on its own. It's a business of running your business, kind of. And, to your
It,
point, when you told that
yeah,
people are afraid of hearing complaints, and yes, they will be complaining anyway, but they can go complain on Google Maps or they can complain in your space and see what you are doing. And on Google Maps, you can do nothing except for answers. And in your space, you can really solve the situation and grow out of it. And as you've mentioned, that all those people who complain the most, you can turn them into brand advocates, and then they'll be your best supporters in the future. It won't happen on Google Maps. No.
absolutely. No, you want to have those conversations hosted where you can see them, where you can respond to them, where you can track that information. It amazes me how many organizations don't want to make their communities public or they don't want to create a space where customers could complain because they don't want it out there. And if you're concerned that people have complaints about your business, that is every reason to have a community where you can really be engaged with it and know what those concerns are and address them. Half the time, the concerns and complaints are misunderstandings about how something works anyway. And so you want to be able to correct that and you want to know who's got those concerns. So I'm always a big advocate for that. I also loved what you said about the community almost kind of being a business unto itself. I know for me, and I imagine for many other community professionals, that's what drew me into community management was that idea of, hey, I'm not just learning to do one thing. I get to learn about product and support and customer marketing and product marketing and events. And I get to do all of these different things. And I know what's going on across the business. At my last organization, I really found that oftentimes just being in that community role, I was the one that was able to say, hey, did you know that somebody over in this other department is working on something similar? Let's connect those dots. And
Yeah.
I only knew about it because I met with both of those teams every week and had these connections that other people in the organizations just didn't have. And so I think that that is some of the magic and some of what's really special about being a community manager and the skills that community managers have. So I think they're an underrated player in the team. If you really want to know what's going on across your business, talk to the community managers.
Yeah, it's so I always have the joke that I'm kind of wise CEO of the company because I also always know what's happening everywhere and like what teams are working on what and how to help them to work together. So I totally get what you're talking about. And I feel like you were talking about so many different community goals and benefits for the company. And still, what's your definition of a community goal?
Well, I think that there's a lot of different ways you can take it. And every time you ask a community professional, they'll probably say, well, it depends on what your business's goals are and what your users' goals are. So, I'll reiterate the point that the goals for the community need to be where the objectives of the company and the objectives of the members of that community overlap. If the company really wants the community to be all about product innovation, but the customers really just want product support, and the company's building for one and the users are doing the other, things aren't going to go well. And so it's really important that you look at both. And that's why I always say when somebody's launching a new community or relaunching a community, it's really critical to build with the members, have them
Yeah.
involved in that process and understand what are their needs and objectives. Because it might be different than what the business imagines it to be or thinks that the biggest business offering is. You will get value out of your community if you get people involved and engaged. It might be a different value than what you initially set out to do, but if you build with them, it will be sticky and they will come and they will engage and they will show you where to go. Um, that being said, I do think it is critical to look at what are the business objectives and think really seriously about how can my community contribute to that? How can I measure it?
Yeah.
And start to set those benchmarks so that you do know if you're making progress and if you're headed in the right direction.
What is one goal of the community you are working with at the moment or worked before that inspires you personally the most?
So, the goal that I always have, especially for B2B communities, is to not just have an impact on my members day to day, right? It's not just how many questions can we answer, how many product ideas can we deliver. Don't get me wrong, those are important too, but it's really about having an impact on their career, right? I was just talking with somebody the other day, and it's sort of like they come for the answers and they stay for the connections. And so you have to do both. You have to make sure that whatever that goal of your community is, say it's a support community, you're getting good answers. You're getting them out there quickly. You're validating them. You're labeling them. You're making them easy to find. And you're measuring what is that number for, ticket deflection or answers or doing a community survey. By the way, I'm a big fan of surveys. I think they're actually the best way to measure community impact because there's all these metrics out there that you can put in, algorithms and things that you can figure out to get some numbers around stuff. But the survey actually tells you how happy you are. So I would say like
Yeah.
the goal that always inspires me the most is increasing how the satisfaction or the happiness of your members. But for me, like I said, I want to have an impact on someone's career. And that means that your community is going above and beyond and people are really making those connections. And so I've never really formally measured it. But the things that I look for to know that if the community is having the right kind of impact is number one, are there members who have stayed in the community and come back again through multiple jobs, right?
Mm.
Do they see the value so much that this community is a through line in their career? Because that means they've either built a career path around, being an administrator of your software or being a specialist in it, or it means that they're going to new companies and then bringing your software with them. You want to talk about being a brand advocate, that is the gold standard, right? And then the other one is, are there members of the community that have gotten jobs through one another or thanks to the skills they've built in the community? For example, at Zendesk, I knew that we were really building a successful community when one of our members got laid off. And then another member said, well, hey, we're hiring for something like that in my community. Let me refer you. And then they started working together. And
Oh,
then there's
cool.
another guy that said he put being a Zendesk community moderator on his resume. And that was one of the things that convinced an organization, okay, this guy really knows what he's talking about. He carries clout in the Zendesk community. we want him on our team. And so to me, those impacts on long-term careers, that's when you know that your community is really successful. And so that is always the goal that I'm aiming for.
And you know, my next question was how does it align with business goals? But I feel like you
Mhm.
already answered because people who are in the community and they're going to another company or they're continuing growing their career, they're sticking to your product, they're using your product, they're taking your product everywhere. And even if jobs changing, like product remains the same. So that's how kind of like they're becoming your advocates and bring you referrals and new businesses and new clients. So it's like anything you would like to add to that?
Well, I always think about that as sort of that's the soft goal, right? That's the goal that you can't really measure, sort of keeping track of those anecdotal stories. I still think it's really important, and I don't want to downplay the value of aligning to business metrics. So, one
Mhm.
of the things that I always tell people is look at how other teams in your organization are reporting on their metrics and get yours aligned as closely as possible. The reason for this is that senior executives you can give them this whole list of numbers about the community, and it's not going to mean anything if they can't compare it to how other things in the business are working. So, for example, when we were at Zendesk, I looked at how other teams were measuring the marketing attribution for webinars and said, hey, can we apply that same metric to our user group meetups so that we
Hmm.
can start to compare on a level playing field what impact the webinars are having, what impact the user group meetups are having, and start to look at that. And once we did that, then marketing leadership started paying more attention because they could see, wow, these user group meetups that are run by end users are bringing in almost as much, marketing attribution as these webinars that we're running over here. They're equally important. I can see that now. But until we had those metrics aligned, we'd be like, we got 6,000 people at user groups. And they were like, okay, and what does that mean? Right? Did
Yeah,
that do
yeah.
anything for the business? Did that have any impact? So I do think things like measuring marketing attribution, looking at retention rates of members of the community against your general audience. Support deflection is always going to be important, and that's always a valuable one to look at. I know a lot of people downplay looking at page views, right? They'll say, oh, those are vanity metrics. Those numbers don't mean anything. I disagree. I think page views are really important for two reasons. One, if you see a weird dip, it might mean some part of your site's broken. So it's just a good metric to like check in on once a day and make sure that there's nothing strange happening with your traffic. But two, don't discount the lurkers. Most of the people that get value from your community are people that just read it. And I always love to give
Hmm.
this example. My husband does woodworking. And he has bought all sorts of fancy, expensive tools, you know, things off of eBay and stuff like that. And he really does his research because, like, these things it's a big commitment to purchase them. And so he will never purchase something without going to multiple discussion forums. Sometimes the one for the brand, oftentimes more like ones for other woodworkers. And he reads through all the comments and he watches the videos and he understands what other people are saying about it. It's really important. It really influences his buying decision. He has never made an account on any site. He has never posted. He has never commented. He has never liked. But he's one of the heaviest users of online communities that I know. And so that's why I think it's important to always keep in mind the lurkers and look for some metrics that measure the impacts on those people as well. Because probably 80 to 90% of the people that use your community are going to be those people.
How do you feel about engaging those people?
I I think, you always want to create the circumstances where it is easy to engage them, but the reality is if they're showing up and they're reading and they're getting the information that they need, you're doing your job. You're having the impact on them that you want. And typically, only about 10% of the people that use your community on a regular basis are going to be active or engaged. And only 1 or 2% are going to be super active and engaged. And, those are
Hmm.
the people you want to put into all your special recognition programs and really reward for that behavior. Just because people just read and leave doesn't mean that you're not doing what you need to do for them. And there are some people that are just never gonna engage. I don't think my husband's ever going to create an account on an online community, but he uses them so heavily, and we have such interesting conversations about what he thinks is useful in a community. He just doesn't really want to talk to other people about it. He wants to
Yeah.
just read their experiences and go on with his stuff. And so, I think it's make it easy, make it welcoming, but in general, like if someone's going to be a lurker, let the lurkers lurk, man.
I feel like it's a very very important point because I hear many conversation with people like, oh my God, we have 90% of people in not that are not active, that are not sending messages to our community, and they're not liking posts. How do we engage them? And it's always a question like, do you really want to engage them?
Do you need
Maybe
to?
they're already engaging. Maybe you don't know
Yeah.
about that. Like, why do you really need this kind of vanity engaging metrics? You don't need them.
Right.
Think
I
twice.
generally say if I've got about 10 to 15% of people that are signed up engaged, like we're doing it right. That's been pretty standard across most of the communities I've seen. And I think that's fine. And so rather than changing the percentages, why don't you just work on getting a larger group of people in there, right? So that that 10% instead of being 100 people is 1,000
Yeah,
people.
yeah, exactly. And coming back to your goals that inspires you the most about helping people to propel in their career and grow. So, what specific actions do you
Yeah.
take to reach that goal?
So I'm definitely one of those community managers that spends a lot of time doing the unscalable things. And I think that it has to be a balance, right? You do absolutely, especially in a corporate environment, need to be doing things that work at scale. But I still tried to get on the phone with two or three people every week, right? It's an hour, hour and a half of time, not a big deal. And just talk to them about their organization, what they're trying to do with their community, what they're trying to do in their career, and really listen to their answers. And I ask them what they need. Now, the key is then you have to follow through on trying to help them if you can, right? And so, for example, maybe you're talking to your customer and they're struggling with how to get other users in their business, right? Like they're using your system really well, but they're having trouble getting other teams engaged with it. So I would sit down and spend time and say, well, let's talk about what that business case looks like. Let me look at your slides. Maybe I can help you out. I can give you some examples from some other customers, that kind of thing, help them build up the slides. It was good for my relationship with them as a vendor. It was
Yeah.
good for the business because they were then able to go make that case more confidently and try to get more, sort of penetration into the organization with the software. But I also was able to teach those people how to do this in the future. And that was an important career skill that they had, and it built them up. And it's a critical skill set, no matter where you go
Mm.
or what you're doing, to be able to build a business case. So that's just one example. But that was the thing is I would always look for how can I help you and how can I have impacts for you that both serve your immediate need, but also give you something that you can carry forward in your career. And so that action was literally just a conversation, just like this one, sitting, having coffee, sharing ideas, and then figuring out how could I take action on this and who else could benefit from it and how can I roll this out for a bunch of people.
You told about so many teams in the company, and once again, coming back that community is horizontal part that works with everyone, everywhere, all at once. Still,
Yeah.
what three teams do you usually work the most with while building a community, and how does a community impact them?
So certainly support. Again, most corporations are looking at that peer-to-peer support as a big thing. And you always want to work with your support team in part because no matter what kind of community you're hosting, even if it's not a product support community, you're going to get product support questions and you're going to have times that you need to escalate them over to agents. So you have to have that workflow in place. So I think support is a critical one. Product, absolutely. Again, maybe you're not hosting a product feedback forum. Maybe you're trying to do a community of practice. People will probably still come and tell you what they think about your product. Um, you cannot start a branded community if you don't have buy-in from your product team and a workflow for what are you going to do when you get that product feedback? How is the team going to use it and try to integrate it in the roadmap? And how are you going to communicate back out to customers? This is the single biggest problem I see over and over again at B2B companies. You have to have your product team on board and engaged to do it. And then it's kind of a toss up between success and marketing. And that's where it starts to depend a little bit more on the business goals. Generally, I work more closely with marketing because it's so important to have emails going out to invite people to the community and promotion of
Yeah,
the community
yeah.
launch. And you need those communications. Also, if you're working with product, you're probably working with product marketing as well as part of that. It's so obvious, down the road that you're going to get your customer marketing team and advocacy involved with your community and that kind of thing. On the other hand, maybe your community is really focused on success and it's more important for you to work with your success managers and they're going to be the ones that are going to try to drive traffic. So, depending on your business goals, I would pick one of those. But at the end of the day, I always end up really working across multiple teams in marketing, usually scaled success, self-service support, product operations, product marketing, all of those different pieces. And so start with one, build up that relationship, build up a good partnership, and then leverage that to start expanding your domain within
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah, I know that community managers are those people who are always jumping. You don't have to ask them twice. If anyone comes to you, can you help us? Yeah, sure, I'm already there. So still, it doesn't really always work that way when you're working with other teams. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, how do you encourage people from other teams to work with a community team without not just adding more work to their plates?
So I love this question because it is so important to make that kind of collaboration happen, right? Everyone is busy, especially these days when a lot of teams have gotten a little bit more lean over the last few years. Um, the key that I found to really unlocking that is to start with understanding what other teams are working on. It's a very similar conversation to what I was saying about having with community members and figuring out what they need. Understand what their objectives are. What are they trying to do? What are they struggling with? And then, you can go away and come back in a separate conversation, or maybe you can figure it out in that conversation, but think about and articulate clearly how can the community help with or contribute to some of their efforts. Now, this is going to feel weird because, like you just said, how do I do this without just creating more work for the community manager? There's always going to be a little bit more work when you're doing a collaboration, right? There's always going to be, everybody's going to have to do a little bit more, and things are going to move a little bit slower because you have to work with other people. But it's sort of a go slow to go fast kind of thing, where if you can figure out something that serves both of your purposes, at the end of the day, you're going to be more successful. So, for example, at Zendesk, I remember I was working with the product marketing team, and they were having a lot of trouble getting certain messages in front of customers. And they were like, how do we get more customers like engaged with this? We really need them to know about these new things that we're launching. Could we do a post in the community? And I was like, well, tell me more about that and what you're working with. And they were like, yeah, and like we're thinking about doing these webinars. And I was like, well, we've been thinking about doing some webinars because customers tell us that they don't understand enough about releases. Why don't we work together? And at first people were like, well, I mean, would your team get credit for that or would we? Because like we have to hit a certain number of marketing attribution. I was like, I don't care about the numbers for me. Like, let's work together. Let's do this webinars, have it successful. It can be a shared goal. That's fine with me. You guys can report on your numbers and we can say, hey, we supported that. And so we did, and we ended up building out an event series that became like wildly successful and performed better than any other webinars at the company. But it was because I figured out their goal and said, hey, let's work together on that. I don't need to be greedy about the credit. I just want to make this thing work. And in turn, now we had the product marketing team doing half of the work on these webinars that our community really needed and wanted, and that increased our engagement. And so that is a great example of the kind of thing you do where you look for those common intersections, you work together. It's going to be a little bit more work up front, but at the end of the day, now we only had to each do 50% of the work on a webinar instead of both teams trying to do 100% of it and pulling for resources and struggling with getting marketing because we both had webinars at the same time, all of those kinds
Yeah,
of things.
yeah.
And so it's really just figure out how you can help the other team. And sometimes you're going to have that conversation, be like, yeah, there's not really a way for the community to support this one. And, let me know as a friend if I can help you out with anything, but we can't connect. But most of the time, you're able to find some kind of intersection. And so I think
Yeah.
that that is the most important thing is look for the common goals and don't be afraid to offer help. Start with offering help and it will come back to you.
Something that I hear between the lines, kind of like help me, help you attitude, this
Hmm.
approach. So
Absolutely.
you talked a little bit about the metrics before, and especially about how to present them to decision makers in a way that look how other teams are doing that, and then kind of like
Hmm.
try to approach in that way. Still, how do you bring visibility to the overall community impact on business internally?
So one, make sure that you're part of those reports. If there's a weekly marketing team report, make sure there's a community stat that shows up in there. And that's part of why having those metrics align is really important. One, because you don't want your numbers to look really off from everybody else's. And two, because you don't want it to be like, cool, everybody's reporting on this and then community's reporting on this thing over here. And I don't know what that means, right? If you've got those metrics lines, it's also a lot easier to be like, hey, could you just add our thing to the dashboard? And so you get it in those reports. So it's considered part of the business. So that's one key. The other is a lot of community managers, we're such people, we're empathetic and we're modest. And we're really uncomfortable being like, hey, look what I did. But you got to get
Yeah.
comfortable with it, right? This
Yeah.
is an important career skill in general. It is not hubris or egotistical to talk about the successes that your customers are having through the programs that you're leading. And so I've done things like some companies are big on email and they do a weekly or monthly email update. Zendesk was a big Slack company. And so we would do a weekly Slack update where we would highlight like a little story. This person came in, this is what happened, here was the big success that they had. And then we'd throw a couple of numbers around that. I noticed they're talking about those webinars again. The other marketing teams, every time they had a webinar, 2 days later, they would come back and say, this is how many people signed up. This was our attendance rate. This was our attribution. So I started doing the exact same thing with community, right? So just look at what other people are doing and how they're telling those stories and mirror that, and it will help you be taken seriously. I think part of why community is often sort of the off to the side is because we talk about things in such different terms and we promote it in such different ways. Align yourself with how other parts of the business talk about it, and you'll get sort of wrapped into that story. Also, make sure that those data points are accessible and easy for people. Every time you finish an event, send those numbers out to the people that put those reports together. Make sure everybody's got it and that it's easy and that they don't have to be pulling teeth to get the numbers from you. Because that's the other thing. If people have to come to you and ask you for the stories, it's already like too late. People aren't going to jump those hurdles every time. So you have to be proactive in sharing that. And you'll be really pleased to find how much people celebrate it. And I will tell you, another one of those moments of like, oh, we're doing it right for me was when we got called out in a sales email. And they said, hey, thanks to the community team for hosting this event. This customer, said that when they came to this thing, it influenced their decision. And
Hey.
that's the key. So make it easy for people, align to how other people are talking about it, and don't be afraid to toot your own horn a little bit. It's okay to celebrate your successes.
You reminded me to people who were on this podcast before. It was Tim McDonald who told that in the beginning of his community journey, he was doing like daily, like 5 minute updates on what happened in the community, like what were the benefits, what were the blockers, and what went wrong, kind of like this rosebud turned type. And then
Yeah.
how he kind of like taught management to pay attention to community. Another one was from Stephanie Nakano, who told about let other teams talk about community because it's like the
Yes.
best way. Like if you are helping them and they're talking about you, it's like you don't need to do anything. You just sit and like, yeah, that's me. That's me. Exactly. So it's
Totally, totally. And don't be, I've seen some organizations where people are like, why is this other team talking about our success? Shouldn't we be talking about it? And it's like, it's great. That's what you
yeah,
want. You
exactly.
want other people
Exactly.
talking about your successes. Sometimes people get so caught up with like getting credit for their work and making sure things are getting attributed to the right people. And I just always have focused on like, look, if people are talking about the success of the community, they're talking about me by
Yeah.
default, and that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. Nicole, I wish to have the sky is the limit, but time is the limit. So the final
It
question.
is.
Yes. What is one thing to do right away for someone struggling with identifying their community ROI?
So I think it just goes back to that business goal idea, right? Like look at the main metrics. Most organizations at the beginning of the year will roll out KPIs, and sometimes there's not a super direct influence, but you kind of work backwards and figure out like how does my community contribute to that in a small way? How are other people measuring that? How can I measure it and start doing that? I think that's the biggest key. I think where people get caught up with ROI is they measure all of these things, and then the executives go, okay, is that good? Like, they don't always know. Could we be doing more? Should we be doing more? How does this
Yeah.
fit with everything else? And so, if you can work backwards and fit in with those other metrics, they might not be the most important metrics to you as the community manager, but the important thing is that you're figuring out the metrics that are most important to the decision makers and talking about it in their terms. And that's what's going to help. And so, I think that that is the key. The other thing is do those surveys. Run a
Yeah.
quarterly
Exactly.
or a twice a year survey, just like you were saying, how you tend to ask a lot of the same questions on the podcast to see what the different answers you get are. Ask the same questions in your survey on a regular basis so you can start to compare over time. Are people happier than they were 6 months ago? Are they finding more success? Are we getting more responses to the survey? That's an
Mm.
indicator in and of itself. And then you've got some numbers that you can start to measure and report on.
And I feel like it's always great to have some surveys in the very beginning when someone is joining the community. Send them like initial surveys so you have a baseline because sometimes I know that people starting to measure something but have nothing to compare with. And they're like, oh, okay, we have this number. What's next? So exactly to your point. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And last but not least, name 2 people I should reach out to talk about community ROI.
So I think Samantha O'Connor, she was on my team at Coupa Software. She's got some amazing ROI. She is really good at the numbers. She's really good at reporting, and she has demonstrated some huge impacts of the community over there. So she'd be a great person to talk to. And then the other person I haven't talked to myself in quite a while, but I follow him a lot on LinkedIn is Andy Claremont over at Glide. He's super active on LinkedIn. He's always sharing like great insights and interesting takes on things. So those would be 2 of the people I would recommend talking to.
And what is the best way to connect with you?
On LinkedIn, I am pretty active in that space these days. I love chatting with people over there. I check it every day. So that's a good one. You can also always email me. It's nsaunders@higherlogic.com. But I love connecting with people. I'm never going to turn down an opportunity to have a coffee chat and get to know somebody and share a little bit about our industry.
I can tell that. Yes, always. Every time I see your post, it's always something valuable. It's always great. I always reading it. I'm always like learning something new. So yeah, and even now today, Nicole, thank you so much. You gave so many nuggets of wisdom, and you were so concise in a way that you were talking straight to the point, like specifically like. I won't tell you the story about community, but here is exactly how you do it. So I just loved, and it was like music to my ears listening to what you're talking about. So thank you so much for sharing your experience so openly.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And yeah, see you in the community world.
Yes, indeed. See you out there.
And thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about how the community can help you reach and overcome your business goals faster, let's connect on LinkedIn and talk about it. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.